Hi, I'm Kevin Bonham, and this is Illustrator for Scientists, Video 7. I got a request from a commenter, Maverick Iceman, via Google+, for a tutorial that sort of goes through from start to finish the creation of a model figure or a cartoon figure that describes some biological model. And so that's what I'm going to do in this video. And it's going to take quite a bit longer, so this video is going to be quite a bit longer. But if you look in the description below the video, you'll find a link to a sped up version where I'm not talking and I'm just going through it fast. So if you want to see what it looks like from start to finish really fast, you can go check that out and then come back here if you actually want explanations for what's happening. Most of the tools I'm not going to describe in detail because I did that in previous videos, but I'll describe what I'm doing as I do it in this one. So I'm going to repeat something that I've already done, which is basically to make a figure for an annual review that I wrote before. So basically I got these images here from a collaborator asking for pictures that depict an innate immune signaling pathway in the cytoplasm. So you got a virus coming in, some receptors, some signaling pathways around the ER and mitochondria, another one that's based around the ER. You have some signal transduction, some genes being produced, and something called the inflammasome, and then another figure with the inflammasome. And so using these images that the collaborator sent, I made this picture here. So you see you have the virus coming in, some signaling pathways, mitochondria, ER, signal transduction, and I was able to actually fit all three of these things into a single figure. So I'm going to try to do this from scratch. So go from this to this and show you how to do it. So here we go. First thing you might notice is that my color panel here is a little bit different, and the reason that is because I've created a new set of color swatches based on the annual review's guidelines. And I showed you how to do this in a previous video, I think video 3, where I talked about color. So you should go back and look at that if you want to know how to do that. But the first thing I like to do is to sort of set up some shapes, ignoring color, and sort of lay out the figure before trying to deal with making it look pretty. So first thing to do, I'll just sort of imagine I'm using the entire canvas here. It doesn't really matter the size in this case. This is the size 8.5 by 11. You can show rulers with Command R if that matters at all. In this case, it doesn't. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make a nucleus. I want to make the endoplasmic reticulum, a mitochondrion, a couple of receptor and virus particles, just to sort of give this some shape. So what I'll do is I'll pick some sort of standard colors. Doesn't really matter what they are. These aren't going to be the final colors, but this is just to give a shape to the process. So we're going to make a nucleus. We're going to make some DNA. So to do that, I'm going to use the pencil tool and just draw some DNA here. That. We'll make this a group. So again, we can keep these things sort of off to the side and then make duplicates when we want to bring them into the nucleus. You can click and hold Alt to drag, make copies in there. We'll make some receptors. So as you can see, these are cytosolic receptors. They're sort of just circles and various versions of that. So nothing too complicated. So we can just use our shape tools to make a couple of examples. We can make some things that are sort of combinations of these using the Pathfinder tool. Combine those shapes. Oh, that kind of looks awkward. So if you make an ellipse, you can use the direct selection tool to select individual points and sort of bring them in a little bit to give this sort of a slightly different shape. can do the same thing with rectangles. Use the convert anchor point tool to give this a little bit of curvature here. And again, these are, I don't know what I'm going to use these for later, but just getting sort of a staple of shapes. That looks bad because it's all off center, so I'm going to try that again. Maybe hold shift to keep these even. Looks a little better. So those are going to be some receptors. And to make a virus, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. You can see here, it looks kind of fancy, but a lot of that is just from using gradients in the color, and it's actually pretty simple. It's just a hexagon with a couple of sticks and a couple of circles. So I showed you how to do something like this in a very early video, but just to repeat, take a polygon tool, click, brings up a little dialog box. We'll make this six-sided. We'll make some line segments. And the easiest way that I've found to make these line segments look good is to sort of draw a vertical line of some size and then rotate it at fixed distances. So if you have a hexagon, these are 60-degree angles between each of these. And this is 90 degrees, so if we want this guy, this is going to be 30 degrees. This is going to be 90 degrees, 150, etc. So can make a couple copies of this guy, and then, so I'm just clicking and dragging with Alt held down, and then I'm going to use the rotate tool, R, to rotate. That doesn't make any sense. We're not going to do that. We're going to come down here and we're going to say, okay, I want to rotate this guy 30 degrees. And that goes backwards, so we're going around the way this way, but that's fine. Take this guy, rotate him 90 degrees. Rotate him 150 degrees, not 1500 degrees. He's going to be 180. No, that's not right. 150 to 210. And you can do negative degrees too, so we could make, for these last two, we could say negative 30. And that'll rotate it that way. And negative 90. It's basically the same thing. So once we have all our little pieces, we're going to zoom in, and we actually want to attach these points to the edges here. Again, if you don't have Smart Guides turned on, you want to go to View, Smart Guides, or Command U is the shortcut that'll help you sort of align a little bit. You can always zoom in a little further if you need to. And now I've turned Smart Guides off on accident, so I want to keep these guys aligned. There we go. So now we have that. We'll do the little circles on the end. So we'll go grab our ellipse tool, click and drag with Shift held down so you get nice perfect circles again, and we'll bring these guys in to intersect. Now what we could have done, if I had thought ahead at all, is we could have made the original stick with the circle attached and then duplicated that and then rotated, which would have made these a little bit easier, a little bit more uniform, but Smart Guides make it look pretty good, I think. Go ahead and select these circles, change them all to this color. Again, we're going to deal with colors a lot later. And then I'm going to click this Command G to group them all together. So now if I grab one, it's not just grabbing individual things. That whole thing is a group. And it'll shrink and expand together. All right, so there's a virus. We've got our DNA, we've got a couple of shapes. So now we're going to make something a little bit more complicated. We're going to make the ER, which I'll just go show you how this is going to end up. So this is obviously a lot more complicated than anything I've shown you before, but the components are actually pretty simple. So this is going to be using some new tools, but essentially we're going to make a couple of rounded rectangles. Like this. And this is going to be our ER. So now we're going to connect these things together with some little pieces. And so to do that, I'm going to do something fairly simple. Make rectangles. And we're going to add anchor points into the center of the rectangle so we can curve the inside of these. If you have the newest version of Photoshop, if you have the Creative Cloud version, it's actually really easy. You can just use the Convert Anchor Point tool, Shift-C, and grab an edge and pull it in. You can use the Shift key to make that uniform if you want, and you can make a curved rectangle. So that's the really easy way to do it if you have the newer version. The older versions I don't think have that, so it's a little bit more complicated, but not by much. So what you can do is you can go to the Add Anchor Point tool, and you can add an anchor point right in the center there. Do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to use the Direct Selection tool, shortcut A, and pull this guy in a little bit in the center. And these are really angular, which is no fun. So again, go to the Convert Anchor Point tool, Shift-C, and now we're going to drag this and curve it, or pull it out. So I'm holding Shift. So now we get a curve this way. So we have a nice curve here, like that. It's got a little channel. And we're going to make a couple more of these. Just clicking and dragging with Alt again. Oops. So now we have our channels, and of course we want all of these to be connected in some way, like this guy is. So we're just going to come up here, select all of them, create a single shape, and now we have our nice little ER with all of its connected pieces. But of course, this is not the way that an ER would look. Usually in a cell, it's going to curve around the nucleus. So in order to do that, we're going to do something that I don't think I've talked about in a previous video, and that's to use some effects. So what we're going to do is we're going to distort and transform. No, I lied. We're going to warp. Here we go. So we're going to arc it. So when you do the arc, it comes up with this dialog box, and now we can play around with the bend. And if you have this checkbox preview here selected, as you move things, it's going to show you what that looks like on the actual thing. So the original arc it made was pretty good. I like that. So now we've got this arced shape here that's going to fit nicely around the nucleus. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here. But what you can see is that it's kind of hard to deal with this shape because we have the original shape that has the arc applied to it. And if we individually want to adjust pieces of this, we're going to be adjusting the stuff that's attached to the original shape. And if we do this, it's a little bit unclear what's going to happen to the original shape. So we can go and modify individual pieces, and that's working on the underlying shape. Oops, I just deleted it on accident. But it's not necessarily clear from the get-go how that's going to apply to the original shape. And so unless you want to go backwards, which I rarely want to do, what I want to do is I want to make this shape that we're seeing the actual shape. So to do that, we're going to go to Object, Expand Appearance. And when we do that, now this shape is an actual shape, and the anchor points that you can see here are pieces of these paths rather than what we had before, which was this path and the arc applied to it. So I just noticed, though, that we're missing a connection between these 2 points. That's fine. I'm not going to go back and deal with it, but you guys could if you wanted to. So I'm going to go reapply that expand appearance, and now we have a nice shape of an ER that curves around the nucleus. So the next thing to do, if you want to give it a bit of a 3D look, the way that this has, is to basically make a new copy of this. So to make this a little bit clearer, I'm going to fill this guy in, the new color. And all we're going to do is we're going to make a copy by clicking and dragging, holding the Alt key. So we're going to make a new copy. One thing that can help is to lock the one in the back, so Command 2. So now we've got this new copy here, and you can see this doesn't look particularly good. This is actually going to be the one in the back, so I'm going to do Command Shift and the close bracket, or Object Arrange, send backwards, or send all the way to the back. So now the object that I'm actually manipulating is the one that's in the back. And now you're going to have to do a little bit of fine adjusting to make this look like it's sort of in the back. And so the first thing I'm going to do is change the color a little bit. So we'll make this guy a bit of a darker purple. So we have the front one is this purple. I'm going to go here to the color guide. So we have this purple selected. We can make it a bit of a darker purple. And then we're going to come in here and we're just going to do a little bit of editing. So for instance, here you can see that it's pretty clear that this is a separate object. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, grab this point, and drag it down to the edge here so that this looks a little bit closer. You can grab this guy, use the arrow to bring him in a little bit. You can do the same to these individual points. And this is a bit of tedious work, but if you spend some time on this, if you spend some time on this, you can make it look a lot nicer. So you can go through and adjust every single point here so that you have some nice transitions between the front and the back. And I'm not doing this super smoothly, but that way you can convert something like this, where it's pretty clearly two objects, to something like this, where it looks like it's part of the same thing. And again, the front part is locked, Command 2, and the back part is what we're manipulating. So I'm not going to do it for the whole object, but you can go through and do that. The one other thing that I did was to give just a little bit of texture here, is to come in, well, this looks like crap, is to come into these transition points and put a little crease here. And so to do that, very simply, I just made a line. And I made the line a bit smaller than the other lines. Let's make this one quite a bit smaller. And again, you can use the direct selection tool to kind of stretch these lines out, or not. I think this actually looks a little bit better. Have a little bit of gap there. So then you can do this for each of these transition points. So it looks like you got a little crease there. Give it a little bit of a 3D vision. So again, you would want to fix these lines here. So we've got the ER. It's looking pretty good. And then once that's done, you can unlock the front layer. So Command Alt 2 or Control Alt 2 if you're on a PC. select everything, and if you've made those little lines, you want to make sure that you've selected all of those little transition lines as well, and then Command G gives you a group. So now this whole thing will be moving together. Oops, I selected the nucleus as well. I guess that's okay. Doesn't matter much. So let's make a mitochondrion. So we're going to start with an ellipse tool here, but we don't want it to be too elliptical, so I'm going to drag the edges in a little bit, give it a little bit more of a boxy shape, and then do a sort of similar thing that we did with the ER. We're going to make a copy of that. Can use I to give it the same back color, because mitochondria and ER share a share a contiguous membrane, so keeping them the same color makes a lot of sense. Moved them to the back, lock the front guy. We'll grab this point, trying to make it a little bit smoother of a transition. So you get a nice shape there. Okay, but now how do we get the inner part to have the nice folds of the mitochondrial matrix? So to do that, we're going to unlock the front, and we're just going to make some folds. So again, I'm going to use the pencil tool, and I'm just going to draw some mitochondrial folds here. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time doing it, but that looks okay. It's not great. But what we can do now is we can take this front piece. Oops, ignore that. Take these mitochondrial folds, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Pathfinder tool, and we're going to subtract front, minus front. And then move this guy back on here, and now we have a nice mitochondrial matrix on top of this. So if you go back to here, what this looks like, you can see it's sort of the exact same thing. We've just got this front section here and this back object here, and this is a lighter color than the front section. So obviously you could make it look a little bit prettier, but that's basically how we made the mitochondrial matrix. Okay, so now what about this piece? So we want to have a little bit of a transition between the mitochondria and the ER. So I'm going to take these pieces, we're going to group them, going to move them to the ER, and then we're going to basically do the same thing that we did with this transition piece. We're going to make a rectangle, and we're going to curve in the side. So again, with the newer version, it's a bit easier. I'm not going to go through the hard version again, but you can go back and take a look at how we did that. And we'll put this here. Obviously, that doesn't look great. Maybe rotate it a bit. And we want this to be the same color as the outer bits. So we'll do that. I think I want this piece in front, so we'll move all of these guys to the front. And then, one thing that's kind of nice is instead of having this connection here, this obvious black line, what we can do is we can use the direct selection tool to select this path directly and then just delete it. So now we have this piece coming in. We could make the stroke a bit thinner if we wanted to make it look more like it's attached. And now we've got a piece connected there. Okay, so we've got an ER going, a mitochondria going. Now let's pull in some of the other pieces. Let's pull in a virus. And this virus has some component that needs to be detected. In this case, we're looking at RNA viruses, so we want to make a piece of RNA. It's a little bit different than the DNA. Again, just using the pencil tool to draw a curved shape. I don't like that one. Let's try again. Just want it to be a bit more compact. So here we have a piece of RNA. Give it a little bit of a rotation. And it needs to be detected by one of our receptors. So I previously made a receptor out of these two guys. So the RigI protein, which is what we're looking at here, has a card domain and a helicase domain. I like to make my proteins have a couple of domains if that matters for your description. If it doesn't, you could just use a circle or whatever, but I'm going to use the Pathfinder tool to combine those. This is RigI. He's going to be detecting that RNA and then doing some signal transduction. So to do signal transduction, arrows work nicely, and Illustrator has some nice ways to do arrows. So I'm just going to take a line, segment, or actually let's do it with a pen tool so we can get a little curve going. So click a point, click another point, and drag. So we'll get a nice curve. No fill. And if you select this and then you go to the stroke panel, so again, if you don't have these panels, you can go show them with view or window, sorry, and then find the stroke. I'm right now in the layout workspace, in the default layout workspace. I showed in a previous video how you can adjust your workspace if you like that. But here we have a bunch of different ways that we can affect this guy, one of which should be an arrow. And I don't recall exactly how to pull that arrow bit up. Maybe you have to expand this out. Show options. Ah, there we go. So we show options, and then we can put an arrowhead on here. So I don't know what a signal transduction arrow looks like. I kind of like that one. So if it puts it on the wrong side, obviously you can move this back to none and go and select it again on that one, or you can just swap start and end. You can't see the text there, but swap start and end arrowheads. But you need to actually have your thing selected if you want it to actually swap. One thing I've noticed is that the arrowheads are often comically too large. So this is just a two-stroke thing, but the arrowhead you can see has doubled in size, which is a little annoying. So what you can do is you can come down here to the scale and you can give that a 30% scale. But again, you have to be selecting your actual arrow. Call that 30%. That's a little too tiny. So let's call that 70%. That's a slightly nicer looking arrow. And oops, I've sent it in the wrong direction. So again, you can go here and swap where the arrowhead is. Or another thing that I like to do sometimes when I'm making duplicates is just to do the reflect tool, which is O, and then you just get an arrowhead with the other direction. If you want to change the shape of the arrowhead where it's going, instead of going and making a new line, the easier thing to do is to use the direct selection tool A and grab this guy and move him around. So you can see that you can adjust the end of the arrow. You can adjust this arrow if you want to get a different curve. If you want to loop them out, you grab the handles. And you can get all kinds of different arrow shapes. Another thing that you might have noticed in this is that part of the importance of the review we're writing is about how movement in the cell affects signal transduction. So in this case, we have a couple of different things moving, and I've depicted movement with dashed arrows and signal transduction with solid arrows. And so to do this, let's say we want to have this protein moving before it does its signal transduction. We can instead go here, again in the stroke panel, and make it a dashed line. So these dashes are pretty far apart, but you can adjust this. So you can say, I want it to be 5 points. Again, you have to have it selected in order to actually adjust it. So you can make the dashes closer together. You can also do some fun patterns. So you could make a 2-point gap and then a 10-point dash and then a 5-point gap. So you can make a bunch of different versions of dotted lines if that's going to help with what you're trying to depict. So I'm going to go make a couple of other things, basically using these same processes to fill this out, and then start to talk about color and a little bit more refining.
Another twist in the road, and I still see nothing but the same. I cannot navigate the creeping snares encircling my brain. And what's the use of knowing where to go when I can't figure where I am? Another hurdle crossed, naiveness lost, and I am not the same. And still I search for meaning, digging deeper into the pain. Close the door, it's not the moonlight I'm waiting for. Go on, go on. I've seen the answer slipping through the shades of blue in my mind, in my mind. I stumble still and get my fill of what my habits love to find. Oh, please just come and save me from the cyclone drama of my mind. And what's the use of closing my eyes when I can't ever get to sleep? Another twist is up ahead, I can't look down, can't lose my nerve. Keep coming at me and I'll just lean into the curve. Close the door, it's not the moonlight I'm waiting for. Go on, go on. I've seen the answer slipping through the shades of blue in my mind, in my mind. And everything that's real dissolves the moment I can find a way to feel it through. Lips turn to the moon, eyes swimming in blue. Close the door, it's not the moonlight I'm waiting for. Go on, go on. I've seen the answer slipping through the shades of blue in my mind, in my mind. Close the door, it's not the moonlight I'm waiting for. Go on. I've seen the answer slipping through the shades of blue in my mind, in my
Okay, so now we've got this figure fleshed out a little bit. It's looking a little bit better. We've got some movement, we've got some signal transduction, some gene expression. Now we actually want to make this thing look good. And I've been doing all of this in a single layer, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, one thing that can make your life a lot easier later on is to keep your layers separate and keep individual components in separate layers. That'll help you later if collaborators want you to change something, if you want to go back and edit something later on. Having different elements in different layers is really useful. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to put sort of background components on one layer, things like proteins and viruses and things like that in a separate layer, things like arrows in a separate layer, and things like text in another layer. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of the sort of background cell elements to a new layer. So to do that, we're going to make a new layer. And by default, new layers come on top, but I'm going to want this layer to be on the bottom, and I'm going to call that background. It's always nice to actually label your layers so that you know what you're doing later on. And so I'm going to move my cell elements, my mitochondria, which should have been in a group. I'm going to move the mitochondria and the nucleus down to this back layer. And you can see now everything's out in red. I don't know why I have two different strands of DNA there. So now all of these background pieces are in red. I'm going to go ahead and leave all of this, these sort of elements, the proteins and the viruses and stuff, on this blue layer, but I'm going to make a new layer for all the arrows. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to select all of the arrows. Oops. And I'm going to move those up to the green layer. And before I do that, take a look at this arrow here that somehow got behind these proteins. When I move this up to the layer, that arrow is going to come out in front. And this is because the layer order here matters for the layer order here. You can't have an item on a layer that's higher up be behind something that's on a layer that's lower down. And that behavior makes a lot of sense, and it's really useful. In the future, it means that if you put your text layer on top, for instance, your text is always going to be on top of everything else, but sometimes it can screw with your plans. If you wanted an arrow to go behind something, it could be a problem. I'm going to turn off Smart Guide so I can actually position that easily. Turn them back on. So just keep that in mind, and that comes in handy later on. As you can see in this image, I have this arrow here that goes behind part of the ER and in front of the other part of the ER. And this was important because I wanted this signal transduction pathway to come here to the type 3 interferons, and I didn't want to have to go all the way around. I didn't want to have to sort of have an arrow that loops all the way around these guys. That wouldn't make any sense. Visually, it would be really terrible. But what ended up happening in order to do this is, as you can see, this line goes to here, but this line is just a line. It doesn't have the arrowhead. So this is actually two separate lines, one of which is in this bottom layer so that I could put it behind the endoplasmic reticulum here, and then this other piece, which I kept in this layer as well, unlike all of these other arrows that are in the red layer, but that one I was able to put in front of the ER. So you can see that this line stays behind and this line is in front. So I had to treat this arrow a little bit differently, and the same is true of this arrow over here. You can see it's two separate lines, and that's because you can't sort of do this front and back thing if they're in the wrong layers. So just keep that in mind going forward. So now I've got all of my arrows in this new layer, and I'm going to add another layer. Because I was selecting layer 1, it just went right above that, but I actually want this layer. Oops. I actually want this layer to be on top, and this blue looks exactly like that blue, which I don't like, so I'm going to go here to, you can't see it. Now let me move this screen over so you can actually see what this looks like. So we go here to options for layer 4. It pops up a dialog box, and here you can select the color for your layer. So I'm going to make this maybe a cyan. And so this is, I'm just going to call it objects. Shouldn't have caps lock on. This is going to be lines. And this is going to be text. Okay. So now we have a couple different things. Now, if you have the object selected, and we're going to go make some text. So this is rig-I. And so this will always be on top. and you can see that it's highlighted in this cyan color, which is nice to sort of, if you select multiple objects, you can see the things that are in the different colors. And the bounding box will always be on the top layer. So if you don't have a teal thing selected, the bounding box now is green, which is the top layer in this selection. So using layers can be really nice to organize stuff. So right now, this is starting to look pretty cool, but we want this to look, right now everything's blue. So let's try to make this look a little bit nicer. So the first thing, I'm going to go to my background, and I'm going to actually make a real background. So take my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a box around everything. And you can see that this box has now covered up everything that's in my background layer, but everything that's above it is not covered. It doesn't need an outside stroke. Rather, it doesn't need an outside stroke. And what I really want to happen is to have this in the back. So Command-Shift, open bracket again, or Object, Arrange, Send to Back. So now it's all the way in the back of that bottom layer. And again, if this object was in, say, this layer, even if it's all the way in the back, it's still always going to be in front of this background layer. So you need to make sure that that's here, send it to back. And obviously we don't want it to be black. We could just pick a nice solid color, go to our swatches here, pick a brown like this, or maybe this slightly off-white color. But instead, I think it looks nice to have gradients in this sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the gradient panel, and I sort of talked about gradients before, but I'm going to make a gradient between these two colors. So I'm going to have the darker color here, and then this off-white color here. And if you want, you can adjust the gradient here. You can adjust the slider, or you can use the gradient tool, which is here, keyboard shortcut V, and now you can sort of have a little bit of fine control over exactly what this gradient looks like. So this is one way of doing it. Another way that I rather like is to play with the locations and the angles down here. The default there is 50%. So this way you can sort of keep consistency across. So I'm going to make a 60-degree gradient, and then it's going to look like that. Light color down at the bottom, darker color up in the top, or you could do -60 if you wanted it the other way around. Again, you always have to actually adjust or hold the thing, adjust it. So there we go. So -60 gradient, we have the light up there and the dark down there. And so what I'm going to do for all of my objects now, I'm going to make some gradients, and then I'm going to use this same -60 gradient in order to give everything a sort of consistent feel, so it feels like light's coming from the top and kind of coming down. So take some proteins. One thing to do to keep consistency is you can pick one thing here. So I'm going to make this guy maybe a greenish color. So we're going to select the fill. We're going to make a dark blue here. And I don't really have a good light blue in my swatches here. So you could do white to light blue if you wanted. But another thing you can do is you can come up here to the color guide. And when you have the color guide selected, you can see you have sort of some options. If you select this color, it gives you a bit of a color guide. So this color is usually the center of the top row, and they give you some colors that fit nicely with it. You can pick different harmony rules. Complementary is usually the one that I'm on. There's a couple of different options. But one thing that you can do is you can pick this blue to be one end of your gradient, and then you can pick a lighter blue that's sort of the same, it's in the same family here, and make that your lighter color. So that gives you a little bit more consistency, and then again we're going to give it a -60-degree angle, and we have this nice gradient. Oops, ignore that. Okay, so if I want to make all of my other sort of receptors the same color. Oh, and one thing that's really nice to do, you see I just moved the background on accident. One thing, once we know we're not dealing with the background, we can actually just click right there and lock the background in place. so that now I can't select the background, which is quite helpful. And if I want to keep the objects in place, that would be great, except now then I wouldn't be able to select them and change their color. So if we want our different receptors to be the same, we can use the eyedropper tool, grab that. Another option is to do that, but then maybe just change what is on the lower end of the gradient a little bit, if you want to have mostly the same but slightly different. One thing I did for my viruses is I made, instead of having the sort of directional gradient, I made them have a radial gradient. In order to do this, unfortunately, you can see the colors here is like, what is it? And that's because the lines and the circles all have different things. So in order to deal with this, we have to ungroup this so we can select individual pieces by themselves. Another option is something that I've done on accident a couple times. So this is in a group. You can double click and then you're in isolation, and now I can click individual objects within this group and adjust them. So I have this selected. I'm going to make him a nice red color because he's dangerous, he's a pathogen. And instead of having this radial gradient like I mentioned, we can change this to, or sorry, instead of having a linear gradient, we can change it to a radial gradient. Maybe move the black a little bit over. And then I can go and select individual objects within this group, eyedropper tool, give it the same gradient. So now we've got a virus here. This is an RNA virus. I want to do something similar with the DNA virus, except I want to swap these guys. So I'm going to have the red on the inside and the black on the outside. Oops. And we'll do the same thing. Eyedropper tool. Oops. Eyedropper. And do that. So now these viruses look very similar, but they're a little bit different. And just for a little bit of consistency, I'm going to take now this red and I'm going to give him a red stroke on the outside so that he is a more consistent virus there. We could do the same with the outside, but I'm not going to deal with it. So one thing that's kind of fun is you can do the same thing with lines. So strokes can also have gradients. So I'm going to go here and take this same gradient and drag it onto the line here, and now this object has a gradient. And I did that here as well. You can see that this guy is sort of red to white, and the nucleic acid coming out of him is also red to white, and the same thing for the DNA coming out of this DNA virus. So you can go through, we have to unlock the background if we want to deal with this. I kind of liked the front being a little bit of a lighter pink, so again we can go select this color, pick a lighter harmony there, and then I would want to do the same thing with the ER. That looks a little bit better. We might want to change the backgrounds. So in this version over here, to give a little bit of three-dimensionality to this, you can see that the backgrounds of these objects actually have a radial gradient themselves. So picked a sort of purple color and then click and drag that over, and we gave it a radial gradient. And that's a little bit too much in my opinion, so you can shift it over here. And if you want, like I said, you can select the gradient tool and you can kind of move this to the corner and give the angle for a radial gradient shouldn't actually matter. We can sort of, do that. That's actually probably a little bit too bright, so instead of having white over here, maybe I'll just get a slightly lighter purple. It's a little bit too dark, but you can just sort of play around with this and you can get a little bit of three-dimensionality. And then you could do the same thing for the background here using the eyedropper tool. Oops, selected the wrong piece. Select the background piece, eyedropper tool. And now because this is all a single object, you can see that the gradient here, if I'm selecting it, the gradient here is sort of stuck in this position. We could move the gradient around, but it's affecting this whole object, so you might want to change it a little bit, but you can play around with that to make it look to your specifications, and I think I did the same thing with these guys, just to give it a little color. This we might want to expand. But anyway, you can play with it. Get something that looks nice. And that's basically it. I mean, all of those tools, you just basically iterate over a number of different things. You can see that basically all of my objects are just objects with gradients. We have the three-dimensionality that I showed you how to do, lines with dots or dashes. This is a much more complex shape, but you can see that this is basically just a combination of making an object and bending it and putting in the gradient and then just combining a bunch of different objects together to make this complex inflammasome. This was a little bit tougher. Maybe I'll show you how to do this. So this is because during apoptosis, when you get an inflammasome going, the cell will start to, the membrane will start to break down and you'll start to get lysis of the cell. But this is not actually that difficult to do in Illustrator. So if we want to make, let's just make a separate figure here. And we'll make the edge of a cell here that's the same as this guy, but we want to bend this. Again, maybe I'll go through the harder way to do it in case you don't have the new Illustrator. So we'll make a point there. We'll move it. And then we'll convert anchor point tool to give us a nice curved edge. And in this case, we have a border, so we want to give this a stroke. Just make it a black stroke here. And now all I did to make that lysed bit is to make a sort of complex object. Let's use the pen tool for that. So sort of made a complex object here. And I put it on the edge of the cell, but we want to change the gradient here. So first of all, we don't want a stroke on the outside, so we'll get rid of that. And then I made a gradient that started with this color along the edge and then went to whatever your background is, in this case white. So we'll just make a gradient here. And the edge of the gradient here is the same as this internal gradient, so I'm going to pull this over to this edge and then pull white out to this edge. And it's got the wrong angle, so we're just going to take the gradient tool, G. Why is that not working? Something is wrong. Oh, because I'm on stroke. So take the gradient tool, G, move this guy here. Put the white on that edge and the dark on that edge. And apparently, it looks like I didn't actually select the, oops, let's do this. Let's flip this, and it looks like this wasn't actually white. I need actual real white. Move the gradient this way. And for some reason, this still has a stroke. Remove the stroke. And now you have a nice cytosol leaking out. The color is a little bit off here at the edge for reasons that I'm not quite certain about. Probably because this gradient is not quite complete out to the edge, but you could adjust the gradient of this guy to sort of terminate I don't know why it keeps snapping. But to terminate much closer to there, that way the color is sort of seamless. And you have leaking cytoplasm. And this is essentially what I did when I was making that other figure, is I actually made 3 separate panels and then decided to combine them. So if you wanted to combine these two, right now they're in separate artboards, but we can just use the artboard tool, Shift-O. We'll delete this artboard, expand this artboard out a bit, and then we'll take this, and with the direct selection tool, the direct selection tool, we can actually just grab these different points. We don't want to grab that path, and just drag them up. Grab those points, drag them down. We could have also dragged this guy out and then curved his edge. You can see I've got an edge there that's not that great, but we can always take the direct selection tool, select the path, and delete it. Oh, but now we've got a weird gradient mismatch. So another option, delete this background entirely, select that, and just drag them over. And we have now one big cell that we want to, of course, send to the back. It's not in front of things, and you can add your other more complex shapes. So I hope that's been helpful. That's sort of making a figure from start to finish. Well, you'd still want to go in and change some of these colors, but use your gradients, use the color guide, make some nice gradients with the same angle, and that should be good. So good luck. Hope this was helpful.